What do Salieri, Haydn, Beethoven, Czerny, Liszt, Thomann, DeMarchi, Oscar Peterson, Mike Longo, and this guy have in common? Stay tuned and let's talk about it. Today, we're going to begin to talk about playing the piano. That is, what distinguishes a real player from someone who dabbles? I'm going to set the stage and tell you how I came to master this at a fairly late age when I was in my 30s. And then I'm going to teach you how to do it for yourself. Let's get into it. In case you're new to this channel, my name is Reed, and I've been involved in all areas of the music business, artistic to technical. The information I'll share in the next few videos on this topic is unique. Like all good YouTubers doing research, I searched for other creators' offerings before I sat down to do this. What I found in those videos does not resemble what I'm going to say here. First, the backstory. Before I ever came to New York City, I taught piano in my hometown, and one day, this 13-year-old walks in. He was referred to me by the prep division at Virginia Commonwealth University's music school where I worked. This 13-year-old was already a well-taught classical player. He told me he'd been studying since age 4, so it was pretty good, and was sent to me to learn more about, popular music. At the time, I was the go-to guy for this at VCU. When we met for the first time, I asked him to play me something, and he plays me the Scott Joplin rag, The Entertainer. Now, I had already known and played that piece, and I think I knew it better than he did in some respects. But the first thing that occurred to me was, how is this kid better than I am? I didn't get it. I was in my mid-20s at the time. Fast forward about a decade. When I came to New York City, I had a gig in a prep school on the Lower East Side, and I was being considered for one of their faculty positions. The gig was an audition. I didn't end up with that job, but the pianist who was there, who I met that day, had been the music teacher there, and he was so good an improviser that on that afternoon it hit me like a ton of bricks. I wanted to learn jazz. I ultimately stumbled across the man who had been the music director with Dizzy Gillespie's quintet named Mike Longo. If you don't know who Dizzy is, he was an immensely popular band leader, trumpet player, and composer during his heyday in the 1940s and 50s, and perhaps the biggest proponent of the style of jazz called bebop. Mike was in Dizzy's inner circle. In fact, Mike was with Dizzy the night he died in 1993 and delivered the eulogy at Dizzy's funeral. I was with Mike as a student from 1985 to 1993. Mike had a profound influence on me. For one, he taught me how to play and how to write for the piano on an entirely new level. I spent the first 2 to 3 years of the 7 I studied with him learning jazz, the textures like part writing, drop 2, stride, and other arranging techniques, substitution, boil downs, filling points of melodic rest, all the things. One day, I'm leaving the lesson 2 or 3 years in. Mike says to me, for next week, bring in Hannah number 1. Okay, well, this was pretty basic. I grabbed my old Hannon book I'd had for about 12 years at that point, and I worked on it a bit during the week. Look at this. I put the cover from another Shermer on there. Next week, I come in to present and discuss. So I start into it, and I play the whole thing, and at the end, I stop. Dead silence. I look at him, he looks at me, I look at him, he looks at me. It starts to get a little weird. Finally, I break the ice. That's what you want, right? And then he says in his trademark jazzer voice, yeah, except you play the piano wrong. Such fun. Now, I'm not much of a hothead. I normally keep my cool pretty well, but in this case, I wanted to jump him. I was so pissed. So much work over a 20-year period, and I get wrong. He just smiles. I've got a feeling that this scene has played out with his students many times over the years, And he enjoys it more each time it happens. Well, we didn't get back to jazz for a long time after that. At least 2 years, maybe 3. But I'm a good student, and as I always say, there are 2 types of things that you don't know. First, there are things you know don't know. Like, I know I can't play the tuba. I know I can't speak French. But there are also things that you don't know. I didn't know about my touch issue. I'd give you a current example, but I don't know what that example is. Here's one. I had a dog, Tito, who's no longer with us, unfortunately, whom I walked every day amongst the garbage cans in New York City. I'm pretty sure he knew nothing about the science around germs, and I'm pretty sure he didn't know. One, because he's a dog, but also because he stuck his head in some pretty disgusting places to sniff and lick them. Teaching us what we don't know is the purpose of a great teacher. And it was not long before I realized what I was learning is why that 13-year-old student from a decade earlier was better than I was. He had a great touch. One day, as we're discussing some technique, uncharacteristically serious, Mike suddenly gets real serious and he says, "This is not something you can get out of a book. This is passed on from musician to musician." I should also mention that Mike had studied with Oscar Peterson, whom most of you are aware of. One day, long after I had completed my study with Mike, I thought about this moment and I wondered who Oscar Peterson studied with. Well, Oscar Peterson studied with Paul DeMarchi, who studied with Franz Liszt's protege, Istvan Thoman. Thoman, like Longo after him, was in Liszt's inner circle and was with Liszt when he died and a pallbearer at Liszt's funeral. Liszt had appointed Thoman to teach at the Royal Hungarian Academy of Music in Budapest, where Thoman had taught people like Bela Bartok, amongst others. Liszt studied with Carl Czerny. Czerny studied with Ludwig van Beethoven, whom you may have heard of. Beethoven studied with Haydn and Salieri. This is what Mike was saying. So the lineage from which this touch topic emanates is pretty solid. That's a straight line from Haydn to Reed Robbins. So I'm thinking it's a good thing I didn't storm out of the lesson that day or resist the topic of what I didn't know. That's a lesson right there for sure. And if you haven't already stormed out of this video, you may have some of this information passed down to you, musician to musician. This time, courtesy of the miracle of YouTube. This is, of course, if you can put in the consistent work needed, which is where 99% of the people who saw this video will fall short. It's completely a function of 2 things, accountability and action. I can explain to you what you need to know in a few short videos, but you have to do it. Anyway, I practiced Haydn and Czerny and then went on to classical repertoire, like Chopin etudes, Prokofiev, Bach, etc., with Mike, the jazz teacher. So in the years since, and we're talking over 30 at this point, I have always kept the Haydn book close at hand, and I practice what's in it regularly with the method I'm going to explain. Actually, I wore out the first one. So now I have this new copy. The next time we meet on this topic, I'm going to give you part A of the lowdown on what you can do to get your touch on point. Gird your loins. I'll see you then.